we're going to look at a Twitter search program where you can save your favorite Twitter searches and repeat them when you want to. All right, nifty little app, I suppose. And there's several firsts in this app, at least from our perspective. So there's several things that we'll be seeing for the first time in this class, in this app. So we'll take a look at them. And as usual, we'll start by looking at how the application behaves or doesn't behave. I realize I tested part of it, but I didn't test the whole thing. So maybe it won't work. Who knows? I guess that will be in its own lesson if it doesn't work. But we'll see how it works, and then we'll look at what is different in this app compared to other ones. So let me go in and run this app. By the way, some of the examples that I downloaded, I don't know if you have to do the same thing. I guess it depends on your install. But I've had to go into my build Gradle and change that class path to this instead of the version that it was. So I'll close all these and start over and run this. Okay. I can think of at least 3 things that are different about this app, and maybe more as I look closer. Oops. I jokingly said that I would be surprised when the phone was still in French. And sure enough, we go back to home. It is mardi, 11 September. So it is still in French, because we did that last time, and we notice all our settings are in French. So let's go and find English. We could rearrange this if we wanted to, I believe. There we go. All right, or we could delete French if we wanted to. I'll keep French just in case we want to do something else later on for it. That would seem to be an easier one. Let's find the Twitter search. Settings down here.
It was on the left.
Oh, okay. There we go. All right. So we can put what we want to Twitter search here. And let's search for the Cleveland Browns. Let's see what they're saying about the Browns on Twitter. I'm not really a sports fan, but hey, it seems to be an innocent enough topic. We can give our query a tag, sort of a shorthand. So we'll call it CB. And we can, once we've notice a couple things. Once we entered both the tag and the search phrase, our save button appeared. Before that, the save button isn't there. It's a form of validation, right? You can't save it until it's completely entered. So I enter that in, I can click save, and it's now in there. If I double click on it from within tagged searches, it brings up Chrome, which goes to Twitter and does a search for Cleveland Browns and shows all the searches for that. Oops. Okay. And I can go back to the application and enter the next thing. All right. If I click on it, oops, If I hold the mouse down on it, I can share it, edit it, or delete it. Other things that we can do, and I guess you'll have to trust me on this, but if we go, and even if I turned off the device, if I go and run this again, it'll show me the saved Twitter searches. So there's persistent storage between running, even if I went in and clobbered the application. So there we go. So even if we go to Settings, Apps, whoops, shoot. I keep the mouse pad is acting really touchy. So if I open this up and say force stop, alright, close it so it's no longer running. If I run it again, it's going to come up with the options that I had before. So Cleveland Browns. So it is, the storage is persistent. If we did that on any other device, or any other application that we've done so far, I don't think it would work like this, based on what I remember. Now, notice something else. The GUI changes. The GUI is dynamic. Because right now, how many lines are there under tag searches? There's one. If I went and did another search, now there's two of them, and there's a line between them. We haven't done anything with this sort of dynamic GUI, right? All the GUIs that we've done so far have been fixed. There's a text box to put the tip in, or I'm sorry, text box to put the amount in. There was a slider to put the percentage of the tip in. There are a couple labels to put the results in. All right. Whereas this, the GUI changes. All right. So the GUI is dynamic. All right. Another thing about this is there are actually different activities that we can perform. If, for example, I hold out on this and say edit, we can go back and edit that. If I double click on it, it invokes Twitter and performs a search. So the fact that there's a second activity associated with this is a new thing. The fact that the GUI is dynamic is a new thing, and the fact that the data is persistent is a new thing. So those are the three that I remember off the top of my head, and there might be others as well. Those probably are the main three, though. All right, so that's how it behaves, just so you know. So let's go into the code, and let's find what's doing in here. So I go in, look under Java, and under Resources. Under Drawables, I have the little save icon. Notice that this is not an image. All right? It's not an image in the sense that it is not an image like a JPEG or PNG. It's a vector graphic. All right? So let's go. I guess that is something new as well. All right. What is a vector graphic? What's the difference between a vector graphic and like an image file?
I'm not sure technically, but I know the vector graphics can be scaled.
Vectors can be scaled. implication of a vector graphic over the other kind of graphic. What's the other kind of graphic called? It's either called a raster, R-A-S-T-E-R, or it's called a bitmap. Now, don't confuse a bitmap with the format BMP. All right, it's one word that means two different things. A BMP is an example of a bitmap image, but a JPEG is also an example of a bitmap image. If you think of it, a bitmap image is just that. There's a description in the file that explains what color each pixel is to be set to. All right. Different formats then are different compression algorithms which compress that. All right, to make the image smaller. A vector diagram a vector image rather, is more like the instructions of how to draw a diagram, how to draw an image. So I'm not an expert on vector graphics, but these are the instructions of how to draw that circle with the diskette thing in it. Now the advantage of that is, as was mentioned, it could be easily scaled. If we make this bigger, then it's not going to distort the image. Have you ever taken a JPEG image and made it bigger than its actual size? You get what's called pixelation. What would look like a straight line in the original looks like a jagged line in the enlarged. That's because when you make the image bigger for a raster image, there's no information to fill in the extra bytes that when you make the image bigger, when you expand the image. There's no information there. So it approximates, and the approximation it comes up with is oftentimes a jagged line, or a curve will look jagged instead of a straight line. But with this, if you make it bigger, it should not affect the quality of the drawing. So let's go in and let's make this bigger. Let's make it 48 dp, 48 dp, viewport width 48 and 48. And run this. Notice that it made the circle bigger, but it didn't make the little graphic bigger. Again, I'm not a expert in this, so that's leads me to believe that this wasn't done the smartest way.
I think you just enlarged the circle. The actual graphic would be that path tag.
Yeah, but the path should also scale. That's the whole point of having a vector graphic. Okay, anyhow, we'll get down to normal size again. Interesting. All right. So, let's look at the layout. The layout, we have 3 XML files. All right. And what I want to do is I want to go through and sort of identify the 3 XML files, what they're used for. First one, activity main, is the main content view. And if we look at that, it really doesn't consist of a lot. It consists of a coordinator layout, which contains an app bar layout, which contains a toolbar, and includes layout content main. So this XML file contains this XML file. Finally, we have the floating action button, which is the save button. So essentially, The activity main contains sort of the frame that all this lives in, with a floating activity button that they put there. Any idea why they do it this way? Why they have an activity main and they say, well, part of the layout comes from this include file. And this include file is content main, and that's what contains the text box, the edit, and so on down the line. This contains all the edit texts that exist. Any idea why they do it this way?
Maybe because that's the part you're going to expand or change.
Okay. That's a good thought. The other thing is, how many of you have ever done any PHP coding?
I'm trying to think of how the include.
How does the include work in PHP?
I don't remember the syntax exactly, but you could, instead of repeating code, you could include the code.
Yeah. I would think that the reason for this is this kind of makes this reusable. Because if you change, you could use this in a variety of applications, and all you need to do is change this. So you set a basic frame for your application, and you set your contact main file in there.
Would it be maybe something like on activity main that would be your branding or something like that?
Could very well be. Something that you'd want some level of consistency on all of your apps. And then this would be the detail of the app. Notice the detail of what this looks like. It is a relative layout. A relative layout, you specify where things are in relation to other things on your page. So for example, I have a text input layout, edit text, I have another text input layout, edit text. Within this, I say that this guy is underneath this guy, and that's what a relative layout says. The relative layout basically contains these two text layouts, and the first text input layout is on top, the second one is below. And the layout below is what designates, hey, that's below. I then have a linear layout that has tag surfaces, and then I have a recycler view. All right? And this is what we are going to add stuff to, this recycler view. So, this one is the first text input layout. This one is the second text input layout. This is the linear layout. The first one contains a text field that says tag searches. The rest are going to be stuff that gets put in that recycler view. So all of our tag searches live in this recycler view. The idea of a recycler view is it allows us to have a really long list of things, and it only keeps stuff in memory that it needs. Because you could conceivably have, like if you had 1,000 rows, you wouldn't necessarily want 1,000 rows to be remembered all the time. You might want to scroll through those. All right? And you only might be interested in the ones that appear on the screen at that point in time. The recycler view handles that, if I'm not mistaken. Let me Google it just to verify. Recycler View is a flexible and efficient version of List View. It's a container for rendering large data sets of views that can be recycled and scrolled very efficiently. So the idea is that you don't have to store the entire list view. You can recycle some of the cells in it. More flexibility, optimized for larger data sets. Okay. The last layout we have is this. Oops. And that is Textview. This is a text view that represents every line in the recycler view. So every line in the recycler view, this list item contains the views that get created when we've added a new line to the recycler view. So let's go through that one last time. Activity main is the main frame of our application. The reason that we do that, we wouldn't have to do that. We could combine the activity main and content main. But the idea is the activity main sort of is a reusable piece of code that we could use across many applications to give a consistent look and feel. This is really the main content view for the app that contains all of this stuff that's inside the frame. And finally, the list item is the XML for each line that gets created. Nothing under menu. We have our icons just like before, and we have our values. We have our strings. We have styles, dimensions, colors, and arrays. Okay, let's look at the code now for this. We have three objects here. All right, we have an item divider. It seems kind of silly that we have an item divider. The item divider is a code that creates this little line between items. Kind of dumb, it seems, right? But we have code to do that. We have our main activity, and then we have our searches adapter. And the searches adapter is going to be tied to this list, this recycler view. If you take iPhone development, there's a similar sort of thing where there are views and there are adapters. And the adapters are kind of what supplies the data for the views. If you've taken ASP.NET in a way, the data sources are like the adapters for the views that we have in an ASP.NET application. All right? The search adapter is simply where the data is coming from for a given control. So let's start off, look at the main activity, and go from there. Main activity. We declare a string, public static final for searches. We declare all these things. Edit text for our query text. Edit text for the tag edit text. Those are the two things that a user can key into. Our floating action button. Shared preferences. Shared preferences is a way that we're going to accomplish persistence. So that between running of this app between runs of this app will pull up what was saved the last time. So there's persistence. We have a list of all the tags. And then finally we have an adapter for binding data. This is what's going to link up the data between where the data is stored, which is the shared preferences, and actually the recycler view, which is this view over here. All right. Super on create, save instance. We've done that in every application. Set content view to activity main. Toolbar equals find view by ID, our ID toolbar. So we find the toolbar in our activity main, which is this guy right here. Find the query edit field. We give a text watcher to that. We looked at this last time, right? What is a text watcher? A text watcher is a place that is going to listen for changes to a text field, changes to an edit text field. So we can code something when they type something in. If you remember in the tip example, what did our text watcher do? Our text watcher was on the field for the price of the meal. If they changed that field, an event got fired off in the text watcher that set the cost of the meal to the value of that text edit field, and then called calculate to do the tip calculation. What do you think we're going to do in this text watcher? What happens when we actually physically type in text, when we change the values of the text? So I'm in here. As I'm changing fields in here, what's happening? What is a text watcher watching for? What happens when I change a value here?
I'm going to say nothing, but something is going on.
Okay.
There's some validation somewhere maybe.
Well, nothing happens when I type Pittsburgh in here. What happens when I type in Steelers here?
Then it is.
Then it appears. So, probably the text watcher, and this is good to sort of like anticipate what the code's doing. All right, that's why I'm doing this. The code in the text watcher is probably looking to see when we've entered text in either of those two fields, if there's a value in both those fields. And if there's value in both those fields, it probably enables that button and makes it visible. If there's not text in both of those fields, if either of them are blank, then it's going to make that button disappear. Notice that both of these text fields, this one and this one, the query edit text and the tag edit text, have the exact same listener, which is text watcher. All right? Let's go and follow this thread through. As we go through this, we're going to try to cover the whole application by looking at a behavior and seeing what is the code that implements that behavior. So, in this case, the text watcher is what? Well, if I scroll down here, private final text watcher equals new text watcher. All right? So this is using the same style of creating the listener like I did last time in the tip calculator. It does it. So I created a public final class of type TextWatcher that contains TextWatcher, and that equals a new TextWatcher class, a new class that implements the TextWatcher. And notice what it has. There are 3 methods, if you remember, on a TextWatcher. There is a before text changed, an after text changed, and on text changed. In this case, just like with the tip example, we're only interested in the on text change. We're not going to do anything before it changed or after. So notice there's no code there. Remember, you can still implement an interface and don't put anything in that method, as long as you have defined that method. If we don't define that method, if we got rid of that, all of a sudden we have an error. Hey, we have not implemented TextWatcher with this anonymous class because we don't have the 3 methods. But if I put back the 3rd method, even if there's really nothing in that 3rd method, right, just blank code, from the compiler's perspective, we did our job. We did what we said we're going to do when we define that as an interface. So, we only have one thing in our TextWatcher, and that is if the text changes, we update, save, FAB. FAB, floating action button. So, if anytime we type anything into either of those text boxes, it's going to go and decide what to do with that floating action button. Notice, by the way, that our listener events don't have a lot of code in them. The one that we did last time didn't have a lot of code in it either, right? There was try catches, I think, but it was calling other methods to do the actual work. That's sort of a characteristic of our listeners. Our listeners don't have a lot of code inside of them. Our listeners call other methods to do the job. And in this case, this method, I guess there's not a lot of code in it, all right, but it shows or hides the save floating action button. So if either one of those is empty, then it hides the save floating action button. If not, then it shows it. What is save floating action button? Well, that's defined way up here in the onCreate by saying save action button equals floating action button find view by ID r.id FAB. That's the instruction that we went over a few times ago. That's sort of our workhorse. This is what we do to get pointers to the objects that exist in a view. Floating action button was defined on the class level. This is an instance variable of the class. Therefore, it's accessible in all the functions for this class, and not just in one function or another. Okay. So, we understand one behavior here, how to show and hide that, because the listener has code in it that anytime this is changed, we look and make sure both of them have something in them. If they do, both do have something in them, we show. If one of them is blank or the other is blank, we hide. Okay. All right. Save searches equals get shared preferences, searches, mode private. What is save searches? Save searches is a shared preference class. A shared preference class is a way that you can store ordered pairs of data. These are sometimes called hashes. All right? Hashes consist of a key and a value. All right? How many of you have ever seen a query string in a web application? All right? Query string in a web application looks like this. If I say google.com, question mark search, question mark Q equals Android, ampersand, L equals English, ampersand, something equals value, and so on. In my code then, what I will do, and what they've done, is they can ask for the value of a particular item on the query string. And this sort of thing is like an array, right? But the difference is the arrays have letters as indexes. They have names as indexes, not array elements. All right? So, I will say in my code, in my PHP, if I was writing PHP code, for example, a little rusty on this, so bear with me. I think I would say that. If I wanted to set a variable x to the value of the thing on the query string that has a name of Q. All right? Pretty sure that's what it is. Don't quote me on that. So, in essence, this is a data structure, sometimes called a hash. All right? Sometimes it's called a named array, I think, or something like that. I don't know. I forget all the names. But it's like this. If I want to refer to an element on the query string, I give a key value, and that key value is a name. So I refer to this as, if I want to grab the value of this. Refer to the name of this for that, this for that. So there are pairs of key and value in this kind of structure. All right? Key and value. That's what shared preferences are. There's a key and there's a value. All right? Shared preferences are used for storing simple data. All right? Something can be broken down into key and data. All right? Just like query strings, you're not passing complicated data structures via query strings. You're passing simple key and data. All right? In our example, what do you think the key is and what do you think the data is?
I guess it depends on which key. Wait, we're searching. Are we searching on the tag or are we searching on the?
Yeah, it could probably be either way, right? My guess would be that the tag is the key and the search is the value. So the ordered pairs that we have, a tag of CB, the value for that is Cleveland Browns. That's my guess. All right? So, shared preferences allows us to store this hash array. I'm going to look it up because I'm curious what the other names are. I know terminology isn't always important, but sometimes it is, right? So that you can understand when other people are speaking about it. So I've always called this a hash array, but again, has other names as well. Associative array. Hash, hash table, associative array, or dictionary? Associative array was the one I was thinking of. Is the 2-minute definition of it is it's an array, but instead of using a subscript, like a numerical subscript, you use a name as the index to pull a particular value. Okay, so we're grabbing, for this application, the shared, I almost came up with shaved preferences, all right? Cross between shared and saved. Shared preferences is the correct term. Saved searches is the shared preference that is titled searches, and the mode is private. I believe the mode is private will mean that only the application that creates the shared preference can read it. All right?
Do those all go into one data structure from different applications?
I believe so. Let me look up the get shared preferences method. Yeah. Your choices are mode readable, mode writable, or mode multiprocess. So I would assume that that would mean can other applications refer to this shared preferences. And this is set to private, which I would assume would mean that only this application. So, we grab the shared preferences. We pull from the shared preferences all of the keys. All right? That's what this says. Recall on our saved searches is a shared preference file. We pull from that, and specifically it is the shared preference file that contains the searches from this app. We pull all of them, all of the searches that have been saved here, all right, which is the whole list of ordered pairs. Key, value, key, value, key, value, key, value. Or search tag, or I'm sorry, tag search, tag search, tag search. And we want the keys for all of those. So this is going to give us a list of tags. So in my case, this array is going to be have two elements. The shared preferences would have all of that, CB, Cleveland Browns, CC, Cleveland Cavaliers. When I ask for the key sets only, I'm going to get an array list that contains element 0, CB, element 1, CC. I then define my recycler view. Or rather, I don't define my recycler view. I point to the recycler view there. I set the layout manager to a linear layout. Pretty straightforward. So it's going to be in a line, just a list. I then define an adapter. All right? for that list. The adapter is for this recycler view. That adapter consists of three things. Tags. Well, that is the list of values that are going to be in that. We pulled that list, remember, from the shared preferences. So this is an array list of all the tags. We then define two listeners, a click listener and a long click listener. So we're essentially telling this guy where you're getting your data from. It's getting it from the array or array list that it pulled from the saved searches, shared preferences. What do you do when you click on an item in that list? Well, and finally, what you do when you long click on it. Those are defined as inner classes here, where you define a click listener for what you do when you click it. And then there is another click listener. I'm sorry, this is a click listener when you click on the item in the list. This is the long click listener for the item in the list. This up here is the click listener for the save button.
It's hard to see that, but in a small window, but it appears that the things you're referring to, like item click listener,
Mm-hmm.
item long listener, are actually defined later.
Yeah.
How it's resolving that.
The compiler, it's okay from the compiler's viewpoint. It can do that. Yeah. Notice these, kind of like we did last time, these are declared, these anonymous classes are declared outside of the class. Outside of the method.
I'm sorry, yeah, I see the brace now.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So, I'd like to take it up to here. The last step is to assign that adapter that we created up here to this recycler view, which is over here. Okay. So when we created that, so this area here is controlled by this adapter. What does the adapter give to that recycler view, that list? I mean, again, when you see recycler view, just think list. All right? What does the adapter give to it? It gives to it where the data comes from, what you do when you click on an item, what you do when you long click on an item. That's what the adapter does. So now, that adapter is associated with that, so that's where it gets these values when it initially loads. It pulled them from the shared preferences. We made an array list called tags from our shared preferences by asking for all the keys associated with the same stored in the shared preferences for this device under the name searches. Searches is defined up here, and it's just the string searches. Again, this sort of is the idea of like not hard coding any strings. You give it a variable name so that you can refer to the variable name if you decide to change it later. So, we know about two behaviors in this. We know about why the save button, the floating action button, appears and disappears. Why is that? Because each of these two things have the same text listener. And the text listener only has one method, on text changed. And on text change looks to see if there's anything in both fields. If there is something in both fields, it shows the button. If there's something missing in one of the fields, it hides the button. So we know how that mechanism of that appearing and hiding works. We have an idea of how this A gets populated, all right, and B, how it knows what to do when we click and double click. It gets populated and it knows what to do when clicked and double clicked based on the adapter. The adapter is created by assigning the array, which is that tags array that gets created, and two listeners, the item click listener and the item long click listener. Those again are created as instance variables using anonymous classes outside of any method, so it's available throughout this class. All right. Next time we'll go over the rest of this. We probably will finish it, relating to what happens when we add one, what happens when we edit one, what happens when we delete one, what happens when we double click on one, or I'm sorry, long click on it, what happens when we short click on it. All right. Any questions about this? Yes?
So the array list takes the keys from the shared preferences,
Yes.
and that goes to the adapter after.
Yes. The array list pulls from the saved preferences, shared preferences, all right? It gets all the keys that were saved under the specific shared preference of searches, because you can have more than one shared preference, right? Each of these is its own list. So the shared preference called searches, we get all the keys for it, and that forms an array list. And that array list is used with these listeners to create the adapter that gets tied to the recycler view. All right?
I got from that on down the get shared preferences. I'm not sure I like that and above. How did that get saved?
We haven't viewed how things got saved yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Explain why.
We're jumping. This is kind of hard because the code goes in a certain way. We're talking about what happens if stuff already got saved.
Oh, okay.
We haven't discussed how it got saved yet. All right. So
There's a thing out there already.
so yeah, this is assuming that there's stuff already out there. Like when I clobbered the app and brought it back up, there was already stuff in the shared preferences for this app. So when I brought it back up, that recycler view was already initialized and already had values in it. So you're absolutely right. Other stuff is going to talk about like how it got saved in there. That'll be what we'll cover on Thursday. Other questions?